bride without a face. I don't remember the exact moment the unease began. It was a creeping sensation like water seeping into my shoes, subtle at first but undeniable once it had fully soaked through. I had been staying at the Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel, a place whose name carries both elegance and infamy. People come for the mountains, the grandeur, the luxury carved from stone. I had come for silence. What I found was something that clung to me like smoke, even long after I had left. The hotel itself feels older than it should, not because of its construction, but because of the weight it carries. The walls are thick with memory. You notice it when you first step into the lobby. Its vaulted ceilings and chandeliers don't just display wealth. They seem to guard secrets. The air doesn't move the way it should. Light doesn't spread evenly across the walls. Shadows cling longer than the lamps allow. At night, the hallways are hushed, but not quiet. There is a kind of murmur beneath the silence, as though the stone itself remembers voices from centuries past. The carpets, patterned with curling motifs of red and gold, swallow the sound of footsteps, yet sometimes you still hear them, faint and trailing behind you when you're certain no one else is near. I had taken a room on one of the upper floors, a place tucked away with a view of the mountain ridges. During the day it seemed perfect. Crisp air filtered in through the windows, carrying the scent of pine and distant snow. But after sunset, that window became a black square of glass, reflecting only myself and the dim light of the room. And the longer I stared into that reflection, the more I noticed how the hotel seemed to lean in around me, closing the distance, as though the very walls had grown aware of me. It was near midnight when I first heard it, the dragging rustle of fabric against stone, a sound that doesn't belong in a modern hotel. It was faint, but it carried the texture of something heavy, something trailing across a staircase. I sat up in bed, straining to listen. The sound came again, slow, deliberate. I told myself it was nothing, the sound of some late guest, maybe a bride returning from a banquet, a gown brushing the floor. But there was no music, no laughter, no crowd. Just that lonely sweep of cloth, muffled but clear, climbing or descending the staircase outside my room. I forced myself to open the door. The hallway was empty, still as a painting. The lights hummed faintly, their glow caught in the thick wallpaper. The air smelled faintly of polish and age, the kind of scent that clings to wood left in the dark for too long. I stepped out, and that's when I felt it, the temperature drop, as if I'd opened a freezer door. My skin prickled, my breath turned visible, yet the vents along the corridor were silent. I walked, drawn by something I couldn't resist. At the end of the hallway was a staircase, broad and ornate, the kind you expect in a castle rather than a hotel. The banister gleamed, polished smooth by decades of hands. And there on the steps I saw her. She stood halfway down, her gown a cascade of white that seemed almost luminous in the dim light. It pooled at her feet, spilling across the stairs like liquid ivory. For a moment, I thought she was simply a bride, lost, searching for her way back to a ballroom. But then I looked closer. Her face wasn't there. Where features should have been, eyes, mouth, nose, there was only a pale, smooth surface like porcelain stretched over a hollow skull. a head without detail, a blank canvas of flesh. The sight froze me. My breath rattled in my throat. I couldn't look away. The faceless bride tilted her head toward me, as though acknowledging my presence, though how she could see me I will never know. The fabric of her gown shifted as she began to move again, ascending the staircase with slow, dragging steps. I don't know how long I stood there. My legs felt locked in place, heavy as the stone beneath them. When she reached the landing, the air pressed down against me, thick and suffocating. The faint scent of flowers hit me, roses maybe, but rotten, decayed. She stopped only a few feet away. I wanted to scream, to run, but no sound would come. And then she was gone, not with a flicker, not with a vanish, but with a fading. One heartbeat she was there, the next she was dissolving like smoke in wind, leaving nothing but the impression of her presence, the faint perfume of wilted roses, and the crushing silence that followed. I told myself it was a dream, a trick of the mind, but I knew better, because that night, when I finally forced myself back into my room, something lingered. The bed felt occupied, the mattress sinking slightly, as if someone had lain beside me. My own reflection in the black glass of the window looked strange, subtly wrong, the lines of my face blurred as though erased by unseen fingers. The following nights were worse. The sound returned, always at the same hour, the dragging of her gown, the weight of her ascent. Each time I dared to peek, she was there, sometimes higher on the stairs, sometimes lower, always moving, never still, and always faceless. On the third night, I heard something else, a dull thud, followed by the echo of a scream that wasn't a scream, but something more guttural, cut short as if severed mid-breath. My chest tightened. The story I had heard in whispers came back to me. The tale of a bride who had tripped on those very stairs, who had fallen to her death on her wedding night. But what I saw wasn't merely a retelling of tragedy. There was no sorrow in her movements, no grief in her presence. What remained in that form was something darker, something stripped of humanity. It wasn't remembrance, it was hunger. The last night I spent there, I woke with my chest heavy, as if pressed by unseen hands. I couldn't move. My eyes darted to the door, and I knew before it opened that she would be there. And she was. The door creaked, though I had locked it. She stepped inside, her gown whispering across the carpet, her head tilting toward me. I couldn't breathe. The blank surface of her face leaned closer, and in that emptiness I thought I saw movement, as if beneath the skinless mask something writhed, something that wanted to be let out. Her presence was unbearable. My vision swam. The room filled with that sickly sweet smell of flowers left too long in the grave. She stood over me, and though she had no mouth, I felt the breath of her exhale on my skin, damp and cold, seeping into me. When the paralysis finally broke, I sat upright in the empty room. No gown, no faceless figure, only silence. I left the hotel the next morning. I didn't check out. I didn't pack properly. I simply left, as though I could outrun the weight pressing down on me. But sometimes in mirrors, in windows, in the black screens of devices, I see a blur across my own reflection, a soft smudge where my features should be, as though something is erasing me slowly, carefully, stroke by stroke. I fear I didn't leave her behind. I fear she followed me. Bellman of Ashes. It is strange how certain places can feel alive, even when they are built of nothing but stone, wood, and steel. The Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel carries a pulse all its own, hidden beneath the ornate arches and polished marble. I felt it from the first moment I entered, though I told myself it was only imagination. But I know now what it was, the faint, steady beat of something that never truly rests. The hotel was built to impress, a castle set against jagged mountains. Its stone walls rise with authority, and its towers seem to scrape the clouds. At night, the entire building glows faintly with lantern light, a warm amber glow that looks inviting from the outside. But once you step within, the light changes. It becomes softer, weaker, as if swallowed by the vastness of the corridors. Shadows stretch where they shouldn't. Corners seem deeper than they are. I was alone on this trip, searching for escape, some silence away from the world. The staff were courteous, the kind of people who smiled in ways that looked practiced. The hallways smelled faintly of polish and something older, something musty, like books left in basements. My room was comfortable, but there was a weight in the air that I could never shake. I would sit on the bed, staring at the door, as though expecting someone to knock. The first night, as the clock drifted past midnight, I heard a faint creak outside my door. Not the sharp groan of old wood, but something softer, measured steps. Slow, deliberate. The sound of shoes polished to a sheen, pressing against the thick carpet. A bellman, I thought. Someone finishing his rounds, perhaps guiding a late guest to their room. I didn't open the door, but I pressed my ear against it. The steps were close, pausing right outside. A knock never came. The footsteps simply stopped, and then there was silence. Yet even in that silence, I felt the presence of someone lingering. The air grew heavy, as though someone were standing in the hallway waiting. My chest tightened, and I pulled away from the door, though I couldn't explain why. The second night, the sound returned. This time, I dared to open the door. The corridor stretched out before me, hushed, bathed in the dim glow of overhead lamps. The wallpaper looked darker than it had in daylight, its intricate patterns curling into shapes I didn't recognize. And at the far end of the hall, I saw him. The figure stood tall, dressed in the deep red uniform of an old hotel bellman, the kind you only see in photographs. His posture was rigid, his gloved hands resting at his sides. A cap shadowed his head, though beneath it I caught glimpses of something pale. His face looked wrong. It wasn't until he turned slightly that I understood. His skin was the color of ash, gray and lifeless, and his features seemed blurred, like they had been rubbed away by smoke. Where his eyes should have been, there were only pits of shadow, and when the faint light touched him, his form wavered, as if he were made of smoke that hadn't decided whether to hold itself together or scatter. I froze. The air smelled suddenly acrid, the sharp bite of burned cloth mixed with the faint sweetness of decay. I blinked once, and he was gone. The hallway was empty, yet the smell lingered, clinging to the back of my throat like soot. The third night, the bellman came closer. I had been trying to sleep when I heard the rattle of metal outside, like the wheels of a luggage cart rolling across stone. But there were no wheels, only the rhythmic scrape of something being dragged. I sat upright, heart racing, as the sound grew nearer. The door handle shivered once, a faint rattle, though I had locked it. Then silence. I pressed my head into the pillow, trying to convince myself it was nothing. But in the black glass of the window, I caught a reflection. He stood at the foot of my bed, his figure tall and gray, his uniform scorched in patches as though touched by flame. His gloved hands were curled, and in one he held a brass key. My breath stuttered. When I turned to look directly, the room was empty. Yet the mattress sank slightly beside me, a weight settling into the sheets. I could smell him, burnt fabric, hot metal, and beneath it, something wet like damp ashes after a storm. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat in the chair by the desk, staring at the bed, until morning light poured in through the window and burned away the shadows. But even the sunlight could not erase the memory of him. On the fourth night, I tried leaving the room. I walked the halls, trying to convince myself that this was nothing more than imagination. The corridors twisted and turned, repeating themselves in ways that felt impossible. I passed the same portrait twice, an old photograph of Bellman standing proudly in front of the hotel, their uniforms crisp, their faces clear. When I passed it the third time, I stopped. One of the faces had changed. Where once there had been a smiling young man, there was only a blur of gray, features erased, the uniform darkened with soot. My stomach turned, and I kept walking. The hotel seemed to lead me deeper, toward staircases that dipped into darker wings. The light grew dimmer, flickering. The air thickened, and at the bottom of one stairwell, I saw him again. The bellman stood waiting, his cap low, his uniform blackened at the sleeves. He raised one hand, as though offering to take my luggage, though I carried nothing. His glove was torn, the fabric burned away to reveal fingers gray and brittle as charcoal. I couldn't move. My body stiffened, every muscle screaming at me to turn and flee. When he tilted his head, ash spilled from the shadow of his face, drifting to the ground like falling snow. The sound it made as it touched the carpet was almost deafening in the silence. And then, without moving his legs, he was closer. The distance between us vanished in an instant. I stumbled back, heart slamming against my ribs. He loomed over me, taller now, his form swelling as if fed by the fear pouring from me. His gloved hand reached for my chest, and though I twisted away, I felt the touch, a burning cold, searing into my ribs as though pressing hot iron into flesh. When I woke, I was back in my room. The bed sheets were damp with sweat. My chest ached, and when I looked in the mirror above the desk, I saw the faint outline of a blackened handprint burned into my skin. I left the next morning, though I do not remember packing. The hotel's grand facade looked unchanged, serene, indifferent. Guests walked in and out, smiling, carrying luggage, unaware of the thing that walks its halls. But the scent followed me. Even now, when I close my eyes at night, I smell the ash. Sometimes, in the corners of mirrors or in the sheen of glass doors, I catch the glimpse of a figure in a red uniform. I know he is waiting, patient, tireless. The bellman does not serve the living anymore. He serves something else, something that wears the smoke of his body and the fire of his death. And one day, when I am too tired to run, I fear he will take my luggage in his hand and lead me down those endless halls. Whispers from room 873. There are places in this world where silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something heavier, something waiting. The Fairmont Banff Springs Hotel is one such place. Its grandeur masks it well, the stone towers, the chandeliers, the sweeping staircases. But beneath the polished surface there is weight. It presses into the skin, into the bones, into the fragile parts of the mind that know when they are being watched. I had heard whispers about room 873 long before I ever stepped foot inside the hotel. Guests spoke of it in half-serious tones. Staff brushed off questions with practiced evasions. It was said the door was bricked up, that it no longer existed, that no one was permitted to enter because something had happened there. Something terrible. I never cared for ghost stories before, but the thought of that room dug into me like a splinter. When I checked in, I asked for nothing special, only a quiet corner where I could be left alone. And yet, by some quiet cruelty, my room was on the same floor where 873 was supposed to have been. A coincidence, perhaps, but one that felt deliberate the moment I saw the gap along the corridor. The hallway was long, carpeted in deep red, with lamps that cast pale halos against the wallpaper. As I walked it for the first time, I noticed the spacing of the doors, each one marked evenly sequentially. 869, 871, 875. Between 871 and 875 was a stretch of wall too wide, too deliberate. A seam of plaster where a door should have been. I felt it then, the faintest stirring of cold against my wrist, as though a draft had crept through cracks in stone. I pressed my hand against the wall. It was colder than the air, colder than stone had any right to be. My reflection stared back at me from a glass-framed picture opposite, but it looked strange, blurred, as though my face were caught mid-breath. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hotel grew quiet around me, but not quiet enough. The hum of unseen machinery, the groan of old wood, the faint rush of wind pressing against the windows, all of it blended into a kind of restless hush. I lay awake listening to it until I heard something else. A voice. It was faint, muffled, as though pressed against a wall. I sat up, straining to hear. The words were indistinct, more texture than language, but it was unmistakably human. Whispers flowing in broken cadence, sometimes urgent, sometimes low. They came from the direction of the hall. I opened my door and stepped into the corridor. The carpet cushioned my movements, but the air felt heavier, as though I had stepped underwater. The lamps hummed faintly, their glow soft and jaundiced. I walked slowly barefoot toward the bricked-up section where room 873 should have been. The closer I drew, the clearer the sound became. Whispers rising and falling, overlapping, colliding with one another. Men, women, children, It was impossible to tell. They spilled from behind the wall in frantic waves, like prayers, like confessions. I pressed my hand against the plaster again. Cold, so cold it burned. I should have left. I should have gone back to my room, shut the door, and forgotten it. But curiosity is a cruel weight. I leaned in, pressing my ear against the wall. The voices surged. Words clawed at me, fragments I couldn't piece together. There was crying laughter, the sharp snap of a scream cut short. My heart pounded. I jerked back, trembling, but the whispers did not stop. They had found me now, and they followed me back to my door. That night, I dreamed of the wall. In the dream, it was no longer sealed. The door to 873 stood open, wide and waiting. Inside, the room glowed faintly, walls painted with shadows that moved though nothing cast them. I stepped across the threshold, and the door shut behind me. The whispers became screams. I woke drenched in sweat, but the sound did not fade with the dream. They were there still, faintly, seeping through the walls of my room. I pressed my hands against my ears, but it made no difference. The whispers had found their way in. The following day, I avoided that part of the corridor. I took staircases instead of elevators, slipped past staff who eyed me with polite suspicion. Yet the whispers followed. In the clink of cutlery in the dining room, in the hushed footsteps across the lobby, in the wind against the windows, they hid, surfacing in snatches, reminding me that the wall was only a barrier for the eyes, not the ears. By the third night, I had given up on rest. I sat in the chair by the window, staring into the black reflection of the glass. My own face stared back, hollow-eyed, distorted by shadows. And then another face appeared beside mine. It was gray, blurred, features melted into a mask of anguish. A mouth stretched open, whispering words I could not hear, but could somehow feel inside my skull. I spun, but the room was empty. Only the reflection remained, until even that faded into the dark. I don't know why I returned to the wall. Perhaps it was madness, perhaps a compulsion woven into the whispers themselves. I went barefoot again, walking the hushed corridor with each step echoing louder than it should. The air reeked faintly of copper, of iron, of something sharp and metallic that clung to the back of my tongue. When I reached the seam in the wall, I stopped. The whispers surged louder, urgent, frantic. My fingertips traced the plaster, rough and uneven, and I thought I felt something beating beneath it, a heart, slow and heavy, pressing outward. And then fingers. I felt them brush mine from the other side. Thin, cold, too many. They scraped against the barrier, desperate, pleading. The wall shuddered faintly. A hairline crack split across the plaster, no wider than a thread. From it seeped a black stain, running downward like ink. The whispers rose to screams. I stumbled back, clutching my chest. The lamps flickered violently, plunging the corridor into a cycle of shadow and light. In one of those shadows, I saw them. Figures pressed against the wall from inside the room. Dozens of them, their shapes warped, hands clawing, mouths open in silent agony. Their faces blurred, unfinished, as though carved in smoke. They struck at the barrier, pounding, shaking, their whispers clawing into my skull until I thought I would break. And then, in a moment of blinding stillness, all went silent. The lamp steadied. The hall stood empty. Only the seam of the wall remained, spotless, unbroken. I fled. I locked myself in my room and waited for daylight. Yet even in the safety of morning, the whispers lingered, faint but constant, like the memory of a sound still vibrating in my bones. I left the hotel that day, unable to bear it any longer. But silence has never been the same. In the stillness of empty rooms, in the quiet hum before sleep, I hear them, whispering. And sometimes late at night, when I close my eyes, I see the wall again. Only this time the crack has widened. The door to room 873 is opening.